Hi friends, and welcome back to my creative space. Today's guest is Dr. Kelly Mark. She's a psychologist and a mental health profession practicing here in the greater Seattle area. So this was an episode I was greatly looking forward to because Kelly is a wonderful friend of mine. She's helped continue to inspire my own mental health journey. In this episode, we talk about how counseling other people can be a creative endeavor, and we talk about running a business as a therapist. Well, thanks for being on this podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This is one that I was really excited to talk to you about because I think as a creative entrepreneur, as a photographer, a videographer, when I think about creative fields and creative careers, I generally think about artists and graphic designers and video editors, and I don't think most people think about therapists or therapy to be a creative career. But as I was thinking about this and as I was preparing for this interview, I realized that a lot of what you do is human interaction, and a lot of my human interaction has been a very creative endeavor to be able to connect with other people. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that. Do you think your career is a creative one? And if so, how have you sort of seen that play out in your work?
Yeah, I do see it as being kind of a creative endeavor. I've actually always been a creative person, or at least I think so. I don't know, it depends on what you like define as being like creative, I guess, but the way that I define it would be a little bit similar to like innovative, but like taking pieces that exist and putting them together and making something new. And so I think in like with humans, like you have like such cool like pieces essentially to work with, like pieces and colors metaphorically speaking, and like the way that you piece together like a conversation or an interaction, I feel like is just, I don't know, it's cool. You get to add like tones and like the words you use and stuff, and you get to create something together. So yeah, essentially I think that it is at its heart like creative.
Yeah. Oh, it kind of reminds me of like me playing with Legos when I was like younger. Yeah. And I think there's a way to like, you know, I would always like follow the instruction manual because that was like me. But I think later on when I was getting older, that I realized you could like rearrange pieces and create something new. Yeah. And so you specifically do that with words though, right? Like
with words and with emotions too, and with like facial expressions and like nonverbals and stuff.
Right. Okay. What are the different like blocks? That you use? So like we mentioned about like words, emotions. I guess maybe if you could define that a little bit more. Like, is it just how someone feels? Or? Yeah, well, I mean, I guess for my, like, I would consider myself a block, I guess. Like, so if we're going with a Lego analogy, like, I'm a block and you're a block. and you know how the Legos have, like, those different, like, peg points to it, right? And each Lego has a different amount of pegs. Yeah. Right? And so I think that, like, each block has a different number of, like, pegs, and you have to see how you fit together. And so I think, like, when it comes to fitting like those pieces together, when I'm trying to relate to someone or connect ourselves, like essentially in therapy, I'm trying to like connect myself to the other person so that together we can do work and build something. And so when it comes to connecting with someone else, I have to find kind of the parts of me that fit with the parts of them. And the parts that don't, and kind of recognize that, right? And so what I'm looking for then is like, actually like commonalities, but also like I'm looking for the feelings that they're experiencing that I can actually connect with too. That helps me to be able to empathize, that helps me to be able to like connect with them. And so I guess like each person or each like block or piece like comes like with, I don't know, different capacities, different like experiences and stuff, and like
each block is a different color, right? And like I see that as being kind of like a different personality, and yeah. So I guess maybe not. I mean, I'm thinking about like emotions and all of that, but hopefully like the whole person too, and just trying to like relate the best I can like with them and figure out how like our puzzle pieces as people can kind of fit together so that we can do good work together.
Yeah. That does make sense, yeah. The sort of imagery I got was I had a friend who really enjoys like stacking rocks.
Yeah.
So every time we go to like a beach or something like that, he would like find these pieces, like rocks which are all different shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
And he'd try to find a way to like put them all together so he could build a tower or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was just kind of what I thought when you were talking about that. But I guess to go even one step further, because you know, as a human, like I feel like I am growing and changing all the time too.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, like, do these pieces like change over time? And then if so, how does that like? And then, you know, because of that too, like now it takes even more of a creative mind to figure out how something changes over time and how that fits dynamically, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Like I think that's one of like the fun, I don't like just kind of stimulating or fun parts of the job to me is like people are so dynamic. We aren't just like three-dimensional blocks. Sure.
Yes.
People aren't just three-dimensional blocks, right? Like we're more than that. We're potentially four-dimensional, and we're changing and we're growing all the time. And so I think it does take creativity to be able to like notice like what's changing in somebody else and what's changing in myself, and see how we can adjust together to still be able to like fit, so to speak, and like work together, but to do so as both of us are evolving, and we're not only evolving individually but also like together, like in a relationship. So our relationship itself is also like evolving, and we both have to figure out kind of like, okay, how are we gonna navigate that together over time?
Gotcha. Does your work here translate to the outside world, with like your friends, with your parents, your like other people that you work with, and like if so, how so? And then are there any like ways that like maybe an average person can be more mindful in terms of the conversations that they're having with other people?
Yes. The short answer is yes, it does. What I do here, I think, does carry over to my personal life and vice versa, actually. But I think one of the biggest ways that my work as a therapist has ended up impacting my life is probably helping me to, I'll say, like, love and connect with people in a less possessive way than I maybe would have previously. Like less possessive, less controlling way. So before, I think like even like as like a younger therapist, but just kind of throughout my life, I've always loved like listening with people, like listening to people, hearing their stories, trying to help them. And I think that my desire to help other people was motivated by like actually like a sense of like control, like wanting to kind of make other people feel better, and in doing so actually control my world because they're a part of my world, right? So if I can control what's happening for them, if I can make them feel better, then like I can feel better. And so I think that was maybe part of like the motivation for helping. I think naturally I do want to help. I am like a compassionate person. But I think some of the motivations were just trying to make myself feel better. And then also probably another motivation was having a sense of identity. Like one of I think the big components of my identity was in helping people. And it is still a part of my identity, but that does not, hopefully that doesn't like comprise my worth, you know? That's still like a struggle, but it's something that I'm like trying to kind of like grow in, is being able to separate, like, no, my worth is not in how I help people or even if I help people. And so as like a therapist, in order to do good work, like you have to actually be okay with the limitations that we have as people. So like I have to go into it knowing that, yes, my intention is to help and to try and walk alongside somebody, but ultimately it's their decision whether or not they change. And I also believe that like God is at work in people's lives, and like there's really only so much I can do to help somebody. And so as I've kind of like learned to accept that, I think it helps me to be able to just sit with people and be with them in the things that they're experiencing and walk alongside them, versus like trying to force them to change or to think differently or do something differently. Like I'm able just to let them like make the decisions that they need to, and hopefully in a way that feels supportive, just like be with them and accept them wherever they're at. And I think actually like accepting people where they're at and just being with them in their stuff is actually the most healing thing. And so I noticed that I'm a little bit better at that in my personal life than I used to be. And hopefully people in my life feel that too. It feels better to me because it's there's like less of a sense of striving and less anxiety around than just listening to people and supporting them in their lives.
Definitely. I think that's something that I learned when I went to therapy, which was I think a year or almost 2 years ago. Which was I think I came in with the mentality of wanting someone to just like fix me. Which would be great. It'd be convenient, and, you know. But as I was going through each of the sessions, I realized it was less about trying to fix me, it was rather me discovering tools that can help myself. And I think the role of the therapist, at least in my life, was and still is to help me practice and develop those tools, which have been very helpful. And so I think I think it's easy to try and like manipulate people, because like I think I do that too. I love control. So
feels good.
It does.
Powerful.
It does. And actually part of what I'm trying to learn is to not use my tools to like manipulate other people or to control other people, but to actually like investigate. I think like that has been good for like me and for my relationships. I think one thing that I really admire of you, I may say, is your ability to ask questions, and not just any questions. I think your ability to ask very precise, but also very meaningful questions.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if you get that a lot from other people, but I mean, and you know, it could just be your, you know, part of your job to be inquisitive and to be someone who investigates. But do you get that a lot, or like do people tell you that?
People do say that I ask good questions. I don't know if people are as like specific as you just were, but I was just thinking thank you. And I was just thinking, that's actually the creative part of me. I think that my questions come from a place of like curiosity, but also like when I'm talking to people, like I'm considering who the person is, and I'm allowing myself to be curious and just kind of like use my imagination a little bit to like imagine what their life is like or what they're like. But obviously I don't know really if the things I'm imagining are true, and so I have to ask. So that's where some of the questions come from.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the greatest roadblocks for me growing up was assumptions. And I think like because of that, it's provided a lot of strain on like friends and like my parents or like other relationships that I've had.
Yeah, sure.
And I think by asking questions or actually learning to ask questions, it sort of helps in those areas. But I think and as what you were saying, there's still a level of just like being able to ask a question versus like asking a good question, which I was trying to get at too, which I think is an art form, and I think like you're someone who's like really mastered that. So I definitely want to learn more about that. It might just take time to just be good at something.
As I've gotten older, I realized, I think sometimes our questions can seem invasive to people because I do allow myself just to ask like what's on my mind, and of course I try and like consider some social norms and stuff.
Sure.
But I think like good question asking, I think everybody can ask good questions as long as they give themselves like the freedom to be curious and also just like boldly be curious, like just to ask.
Yeah.
And like people can always say no or always, set a boundary and just be like, I'm not comfortable with that. But I think like naturally everybody is kind of curious and creative. And like if we just give ourselves the freedom to like let it out, then really interesting stuff can happen.
Yeah. Maybe it's just our interactions, but I guess you described your questions as invasive, but I would say they are surgical, very precise. And I thought about that because, like a surgeon, like they have to like know exactly where to like aim their knife at, right? Otherwise they destroy something.
Sounds so aggressive and gruesome.
Yeah. So that's why I really do praise your like ability to ask questions, because I do think they are they, at least in our conversation, they are intended to allow me to think more, which you've definitely already penetrated like the surface level, but they are not so invasive or like as to be like rude or like brash or like too what do you call it, blunt, to the point where I am like, this is like uncomfortable. So I think that's why I was like, there's an art to this, and I want to discover what this is.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think like honestly, I think that some of my questions really come from a place of curiosity, but also wanting to get to know someone. And I think like I as a person recognize that like I'm multifaceted and like I consider myself to be complex, and so I just assume that that's the case for everybody else, whether or not they're aware of it. And so I kind of think like the more you allow yourself to be complex, it kind of opens up the world of relating, because that means then that perhaps other people are also complex. And so some of the questions that I ask are based on kind of knowing things about myself and knowing how complex things can be, and then being like, I wonder about that for them too. And like when I ask questions, sometimes it's curiosity, sometimes it's a combination of like curiosity plus like I just want to know someone. And because I know someone is complex, I'm going to ask questions that like honor that complexity.
Yeah. And this actually goes full circle back to what we were talking about earlier, where I think everybody is sort of like a different Lego piece.
Yeah.
And I think by asking those questions, you get to know where all the little divots are, and like how long this length of this block is, and like what color, and I think that's really fascinating. Do your questions are they different like in office versus out of office, and then also like, I've already put you on a pedestal, so you're gonna have to answer this, but like what can you recommend for someone who like wants to get better at like asking better questions, I guess?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
That was a good question. I think you actually asked really good questions.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I'll do a small tangent here. I think that the way I experience your questions is being very thoughtful, and I always feel seen. Like I always feel seen when you ask me a question, because I also feel like the way that you ask questions is specific, and maybe it's, I would assume that part of it is like you observe things and you're like observing me, and so your questions aren't just coming from like pure curiosity, but it's, or just, I don't know. Yeah, but you're basing your questions off of things you've seen or experienced of me. And I don't know though, is that the case?
Yeah, definitely. Like I actually learned this from my therapist, and then I learned it a little bit from you, but I didn't realize how emotive I am, even though I can't see myself. So I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but apparently you do. So I think, there's certain cues that people give off, and I think I may not know what each of them mean, but I can at least try and like uncover what that is.
Yeah.
So in
You're
a sense,
at least like noticing it.
Yeah, I'm noticing it.
Yeah.
I'm like putting my therapist hat on.
Yeah.
This is what I observe. But I think too, and sort of the reason why I started this whole podcast is I really believe that the only way to get better is to practice. And what better way to get better at questions than to keep asking them? And what better way to do that than to have a podcast? So
Well, and I get practice doing it like every day.
Yes.
So
yes, I only do this twice a week, so I don't get nearly as much practice, which is why you can see a level of difference here.
No. I think everybody is a psychologist inside. In the sense that psychologists like study, the brain and behavior. I think everybody is like a psychologist, just some are trained and some are not. But going into your back to your question of like, do the questions that I ask, are they the same in session as they are outside of session? Yes, I think like in session, the questions that I ask have a fairly specific purpose. So I don't see my role as a therapist as being somebody who is trying to tell people how to live their life or how to think. My goal is to help them to understand and know themselves better, and to be able to, through knowing themselves better, decide and be able to gauge for themselves like what the best course of action is in a particular situation, or whether or not something is healthy. Like I'm trying to help people develop the ability to essentially be independent and take care of themselves better. And taking care of themselves can look like knowing that they need support from somebody else. But all that to say, like, I don't see my job as being like advice giving. And so all the questions that I'm asking are meant to help people to get to know themselves better. So that's a little bit different than when I'm outside of session, when I'm just like getting to know someone for the sake of relating in the relationship. Like, just as like friends, like I'm just trying to like hang out with someone and like, figure out who they are. And, I like in like personal relationship, I get to ask random things like, what do you consider to be your style of fashion? And like, how did you choose that? Versus I might ask that in session, but only if it feels relevant and therapeutic to the conversation and the goal that they have coming into session. There are some times that I want to ask about things, or I'm curious about things in session, and I might hold back because I'm like, maybe not the most relevant.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny you brought that up, because my therapist and I have definitely talked about clothes.
That's right. I remember saying that.
Yeah, and if I ever write a book, that's going to be one of the chapters. I did not think that we would talk about shopping and clothes. Now, but it was good. Like I learned a lot.
So question asking in session, like almost everything is on the table, but it's a much more like kind of thoughtful process. Like there's intention behind like the questions.
So when I was in session several times, I was doing things and saying things that I didn't really notice that I would do and say. And like I was mentioning earlier, I think it's harder to investigate yourself because one, I can't see myself.
Yeah, for sure.
And there was like weird things, like for example, there was like, you know, when I was talking about something, I would just like slouch on the couch and just be like this.
Yeah.
And like I didn't really think about that, but like, you know, my therapist was like just like noticing or like certain facial expressions that I would have when I am talking about something. I think one, like, do you notice this as a general pattern for most of your clients, like, or just most people in general? Like, I think, do people are people usually not aware of like certain things that are happening? And I think if so, like, how can someone like start being more aware of like what's going on?
Yeah. I think that like it's hard for us to be aware of ourselves, especially like nonverbal stuff. Like, I don't know, the way that we talk is the way we talk, and so yeah, you like slashing and stuff. like that might be normal to you and just like a part of your like way that you express yourself when you're feeling a certain way or whatever. Right. But you might not know why you're doing it or be conscious of it. When I'm sitting in my chair, I'm trying to notice the things that people are saying, the tone in which they're saying it. I'm also noticing though, like other nonverbal cues that help me to understand potentially like how they're feeling. So like eye contact, lack of eye contact or eye contact, like leg shaking, like even the amount of like tension or rigidity in their body as they're talking, things like that. And so one of my goals as a therapist is to help people to be aware of it, to again help them know themselves better. But I think, there's so much stuff specifically related to the body that people are typically not aware of, but the body actually gives a lot away. And if we pay attention to it, then I think that our like experience in life becomes a little bit more rich, a little bit more full. I think all of us like miss certain things. But I think if we like can slow ourselves down and have a little bit more intention of just like, like as I was saying that, like, did I take a breath? Like, how did my chest feel? Like, how does my body feel right now? Then we can get better at like being aware of ourselves.
Yeah. So we're gonna take a hard right and talk about something.
I'm ready.
Talk about something that I think most people also overlook when it comes to therapists, and it's that you essentially run your own company.
Yes.
You have, you have your own space, you have your own license, and essentially you're basically running this whole show independently. And so I was just wondering if you could talk to me about that, like what it's like to not only just be a therapist and be in a position to help people, but also just knowing that you have to, write letters and take notes and send emails and all that other stuff.
Yeah. I run my own business. I have a PLLC, which is a professional limited liability corporation. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy being a business owner. I really enjoy being a businesswoman. Not all therapists own their own businesses or do private practice. Some work in hospital settings or, in clinics and things like that. But for me, being in my own private practice kind of fit my personality and my interests. I think I've always sort of had an entrepreneurial mind, and so I enjoy like the flexibility of it and the ownership over it, feeling like this is really my thing, this is my business, I want to take ownership over it. And I actually think that I operate a little bit different as a therapist, given that I'm in private practice and I have this sense of ownership. Like, I think it's empowering to me. Like, I think I feel like a more empowered therapist than I was when I was maybe contracted with somebody else, or even during my training years, like, working in an agency. I think the harder parts of running a business as a therapist is like being able to set appropriate boundaries. As a therapist, like I got into this job because I wanted to help people, and a lot of, I think, just compassion for people and interest in people was a big part of why I got into the field. And so initially the idea of like charging money and like asking for payment for this service felt a little bit weird. I experience like a tension every time I raise my rates, because, you know, I'm trying to be conscious of like, I don't want to take advantage of people. I know that also raising my rates excludes some people from being able to have my services. I want it to be affordable. If I could, I wish that everybody could have therapy. And so I think as a business owner, I've had to also like, you know, honor myself in the process and just like know my own needs and be able to like kind of like confidently like take ownership over my own needs and honor that by setting like financial boundaries, which would be like, I can't give sliding fee scale to everybody. Like I need to be taken care of in order for me to be healthy and in order for me to then do the best job I can as a therapist. But it does kind of pull at your heartstrings sometimes when you like, when you get somebody inquiring about your services and like they really just can't pay, and like and for the needs that I have, I just can't offer it for the price that they maybe can pay or something like that. So having to trust that like, okay, I'm not the only one providing like this service, or like there will be other people who can help this person. And when I'm taking care of myself, I do better work, and it actually enables me to like give my resources in the ways that I want to, even outside of session.
This sounds wildly familiar to where I'm at. Where, you know, I'm at a point where, you know, I'm a little bit different field than you, so I can still do shoots for free here and there, you know, depending on the person, depending on the situation. But most of them at this point are, I charge for them, you know, and it's because it's a service and because I have to think about like, you know, I'm doing this as a career now. Like I can't just, you know, do this for fun. And something you said that was really interesting, which was it allows me to be better at what I do. So like by taking care of yourself, you're able to take care of others, and I think that's a really important mindset. Also, I guess, you know, I don't know if it's the case for you guys, but I would say like for me, if someone really can't afford my rates, I am blessed to have a network of photographers who or videographers who I can send to, you know, especially for people who I know who are just starting out and wanting to get experience, I can send them to them. There's also people who are looking for like specialty, like, you know, whether it's like specifically for this type of portrait or this type of like style, I can like send people to them. I'm sure it's similar to you too, because I know you like, I guess if I could say like your specialty is with youth and with kids.
Adults. Yeah, so very similar to you, like there's a network of therapists that I know, or just maybe like agencies, like community mental health agencies too, that I know are set up like systemically to be able to offer services like for like free or reduced prices. And the therapy might look a little bit different, but like they're still receiving support and help by professionals. So it's like a matter of like referring people, you know, to people that can be helpful and stuff is an important part, I think, of owning a business.
And it's, you know, it's definitely this mentality of, you know, all tides or all ships rise when tides are high or something like that. Like we all kind of like win together. I think I was talking to a DJ actually before this. and how he was talking about the community here really just builds each other up. So like even though one person may have the opening spot for this particular artist, like you know, they all rush to support that person. And I think like it's very similar to where I'm at with like my network of photographers. Hopefully it's the same for you guys. And did you ever have to market yourself, or were all these clients from referral?
That's a good question. So before I went out into private practice, I was a contractor with kind of like a group practice, and so I spent a few years with them, and that helped me to like build my practice. And during those years, I was actually intentional about like connecting myself with other people in the community and with other therapists and stuff, so that by the time I left and went out on my own, I was already, you know, plugged into like the professional and kind of like professional networks, and like also just like the surrounding community. And so I haven't really had to do a lot of marketing. I do have like Psychology Today. For those of you who are looking for therapists, go to Psychology Today. It's a database of like, you know, therapists in the area, and you can search for people that meet your like therapist preferences. And so I'm on there, and that's helpful. And I have a website and stuff. But it's usually, I don't know, people just like Googling me, and then also word of mouth, I think.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's actually very similar to me.
Really?
I've never had to spend any money on marketing. It's all just been word of mouth. Also, I guess my work is a lot more visual too, so
so people can see it.
Yeah, people can see it. It's easily shareable. So that's how I built my business. I know we're running low on time, but I do have this one question, which is, how do you know if you need a therapist? And then also, how would you talk to people about therapy? I know we're in a different position because we've been, well, I mean, you're in a different position because you are a therapist and you do see a therapist. I'm not a therapist, obviously, but I do see a therapist. I have definitely seen the tremendous benefits. Granted, you know, I think Matt and I really connect well, and I think we work well together. So I think that's definitely a bonus. But how would you start?
Okay, so like, how would you know that like therapy could be beneficial for you? I think that there are, well, I'm speaking from a place of experience now too, right? I've seen multiple therapists during my adult years, and that was a choice that I made because I saw it as being a vehicle for growth. Like I wanted to grow, I wanted to address certain things in my life, and I continued to go, not because I feel like I'm in crisis, but because I want to continue to grow and work on myself. And I think there's always things to learn and to grow in. And it helps me to stay healthy so that I can healthily do my job. I think anybody essentially can benefit from therapy. So go. I think that there's various reasons that people go. Sometimes people go when they're just like really down in the dumps and like cannot get themselves out of it. Usually like the people that come to see me, the majority of them are feeling stuck in some way. And so therapy can be really great when you've like exhausted your own resources and you feel like, okay, I've done what I can to try and like will myself to like do better, get out of bed, have more energy, whatever. Or I've tried talking to my friends and my family, to my loved ones, and like I'm just still really feeling not like myself. And so when you're feeling helpless or when you're feeling hopeless or stuck in some way, that's usually a good indication that like, it could be helpful to have a professional come alongside you to be able to kind of troubleshoot that and help you to get unstuck. There's other people that will come because maybe there's something they're noticing in their life, maybe a relational pattern that is not serving them well in their lives, and they come because they want to work on that, and try and figure out how to have healthier relationships. So there's you don't have to be like in crisis to come, and I think that you just want to make sure that you're working with a therapist that actually can meet the needs that you're expressing. Some therapists do work kind of like in a more time-limited capacity, or they want to do more like solution-focused or problem-focused kind of like therapy. That's really helpful for some people, especially when you're in crisis. But then, I mean, I guess some people would argue with that, but that's my opinion. I think that's especially helpful when you're in crisis. But as you kind of gain more stability and have more capacity to think about other things in your life, I feel like that's when it can be good to do what we call like depth-oriented therapy, which is going beyond like, how do we just survive? And now like, how do we discover ourselves more and like grow in such a way where we can thrive? And so therapists can be really great for helping us to understand ourselves better and figure out, like, let's not just do the bare minimum in life. Like, let's figure out how to help you to thrive and really like live into kind of like the person that you are perhaps meant to be.
Yeah, that's so beautifully put. What about the part where when talking to other people, like
okay.
because there's just by saying like, have you I don't know, there's a way to say it not as great. I was like trying to figure out ways
you need to go to therapy.
That's one that I'm just like, it's probably not the most productive, meaningful conversation.
So like, how to support somebody else who you think maybe could benefit from therapy.
Which, sorry, fun fact, so it was you and two other friends who actually like not pushed me, but like guided me into like at least considering it. So I do appreciate that. And I think you did it so tactfully, so that's why I wanted to like talk to you, ask you.
I think it helps to be able to, for me, because I have been in a lot of therapy myself, I think it helps me to feel a little bit more comfortable recommending it to somebody else, because I'm like, look, I've done it myself and it's been really helpful. And I think sometimes what stops people from going to therapy is the shame that's attached to it, and maybe some of this social stigma that can be attached to it. So when we can share our own story, it takes some of the shame out of it. So being able to say like, I've done it for myself, and like it's been really helpful for me. So if you have experience with it, being able to share your experience with the person that you're trying to encourage to go to therapy, or suggest that maybe it could be helpful for them. So I think sharing your own experience is helpful, and then also making sure that your encouragement is coming out of a place of love or care. And I think that one of the ways we can express that is just by like giving like our friend or loved one like our honest observations about how they're doing, right? So it could be like hey, like I really care about you, and I've noticed that you just don't quite seem like yourself lately. Like you've seemed a little bit more withdrawn or more down, and so just wondering, like how you're doing. And then you can maybe let them share like how they're doing, and like listen, empathetically to that. And then after they've shared, then be able to be like, I'm happy to continue to listen, but like I'm not a professional, and like there are professionals that can help people to feel better when they're feeling like this, and or to feel figure out how to like navigate like this kind of stuckness. And I'm happy to help you like, I'm happy to ask around and see if I know therapists, or, you know, I've heard of this thing called Psychology Today. And I should get sponsored by them. And, you know, you can use that to like look for therapists and stuff, and like, you know, happy to support you as you're looking for it. But yeah, and then ultimately as like the friend, you know, you, I think it's important to like remain a friend in the sense that like whether or not that person goes to therapy, you're still going to be their friend, and you're still going to support them, but you don't have to become their therapist if they don't go to therapy. And just like remind yourself that like it's not your job to get someone into therapy or to make them see the benefit of it. Ultimately, it's going to be their choice. And that might make you as a friend feel a little bit helpless. But I think that's when reminding ourselves that like, yeah, it's not our job to solve this person's problem or to make them like feel better. We can walk alongside them, and then ultimately we trust that they're going to get there when they need to. And if you're like a person of faith, like also believing that there is a God that cares about them much more than you. And this journey is just a part of their story, and they'll get where they need to get.
Yeah, that's wonderfully put. I normally end with what people believe, and like apparently you really touched on that, which is crazy because you somehow read my mind. Do they teach that in psychology? But yeah, that's wonderful. You know, to go full circle, it's about control, or not about control, but about letting the person discover how to sort of like help themselves and develop their own tools to live life more fuller.
And I think like for me, like when I do trust in a God that I believe is good and loving, it helps me to be able to let go of some of my own control. That's still so hard, but I think that, like believing that there is someone out there that cares about us, loves us, has our good in mind, like helps me to be able to like release other people from like my responsibility.
Well, I have to run, so it's just been a huge pleasure and honor to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
I'm gonna try my best to have part 2 maybe in the future, because you know I'm selfish and I want to learn, and hopefully you guys can learn along with me. But yeah, this has just been wonderful to have this conversation with you, Kelly.
Thanks.
And yeah,
I always enjoy talking with you.
Oh, thank you. It makes me feel